Everything you learned about the dawn of civilization follows one order. First, humans invented agriculture, settled down, formed villages, created a surplus, and only then, with free time and spare food, built temples and religion. First the bread, then the god. That was the rule. Until, on a hill in Turkey, they unearthed a monumental temple 11,600 years old, built by hunter-gatherers who didn't farm yet. And the whole order of history flipped upside down. This is the Mystery Archive, GÖBEKLI TEPE. The site archaeologists call the world's first temple older than writing, than the wheel, than pottery, than metal, than agriculture, and 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. Today I tell you what it is, why it rewrites prehistory, and the final mystery no one saw coming. Open the file with me. We're in southeastern Turkey, near the city of Şanlıurfa, in a region that's part of the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization. For decades a low hill there was ignored. Some stone fragments on the surface were catalogued in the 1960s as an unimportant medieval cemetery. No one dug. The hill kept the biggest secret in archaeology for another 30 years. In 1994, the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt looked at that hill with new eyes, began to excavate, and what came out of the ground changed his career and the history of the world. It wasn't a cemetery. It was circles of gigantic stone pillars, some 5.5 meters tall and 16 tons, T-shaped, arranged in rings. And covered in carvings. The carvings are the first chill. On the T-shaped pillars, which represent stylized human figures, you can see arms running down the sides and hands meeting in front, like an abstract body. There's an entire zoo carved in high relief, foxes, boars, snakes, scorpions, birds, spiders, leopards. Dangerous animals, predators, rendered with an artistic skill no one imagined possible for the era. This is sophisticated monumental art, made by people we used to call Stone Age savages. Now the punch to history. Carbon dating of the oldest layers gave a number scientists checked over and over. It was so unbelievable. Around 9,600 years before Christ. 11,600 years ago. For comparison, the Egyptian pyramids are about 4,500 years old. Stonehenge, about 5,000. Göbekli Tepe is older than Stonehenge by the same distance that separates Stonehenge from today. Twice over. And the shock isn't just the age. It's who built it. At that time, no one farmed. There was no agriculture, no permanent villages, no domesticated animals, no clay pots. They were bands of nomadic hunter-gatherers, following the game and the seasons. And it was these people, whom theory said had no organization or time for great works, who cut, carved, transported and raised 16-ton pillars, coordinating hundreds of people. With no known chiefs, no cities, no agricultural surplus to feed the workers. Think about the logistics. To keep dozens or hundreds of people working on that hill, someone had to feed everyone. And there were no crops. The answer is in the site itself. They found bones of thousands of hunted animals and evidence of enormous feasts, with mountains of game meat and traces of primitive beer from wild, not yet cultivated cereals. They sustained the work by hunting and gathering on an industrial scale. It was a colossal collective effort, powered by game and faith. And here comes the idea that turned history inside out, Klaus Schmidt's hypothesis. What if religion didn't come after agriculture, but before? What if it was the opposite of what we taught? The theory, hunter-gatherers gathered periodically at that sacred spot, coming from far away, to build and to worship. Gathering and feeding so many people, repeatedly, in the same place, created a pressure, the need for a reliable, concentrated food source nearby. And that is what may have pushed the domestication of plants. In other words, it wasn't agriculture that gave free time to build the temple. It was the desire to build the temple that forced the invention of agriculture. The god came first. The bread came to feed those who served the god. And it's not just loose theory. Genetically, the oldest cultivated wheat in the world has been traced to a mountain just a few kilometers from Göbekli Tepe. Agriculture may have been born, literally, in the neighborhood of the first temple. The coincidence is too big to be coincidence. But the most disturbing mystery of Göbekli Tepe isn't how it was built. It's how it was ended. At some point, around 800 BC, the builders did something no one understands. They buried the place. On purpose. They filled the pillar circles with tons of rubble, bones and stones, deliberately, covering the entire temple. It was this intentional backfill that preserved everything so well for 11,000 years, and that no one can explain. Why would a people spend generations raising a monumental temple, only to bury it with their own hands? The hypotheses run from practical to spiritual, ritual renewal, retiring an old sacred space to build another on top, some taboo, or a response to a change we can't see. The truth is we don't know. And there's more. Recent excavations show Göbekli Tepe may not even be a single isolated temple, but part of a whole landscape of similar sites in the region, like Karahan Tepe, even more impressive in some ways, being excavated right now and revealing statues and chambers we've barely begun to understand. It's not one temple. It's an entire lost civilization, coming out of the ground at this moment. And the most humbling part for science, it's estimated that only a small fraction of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Radar shows dozens of other pillar circles still buried in the hill, waiting. What already rewrote all of history is just the tip of what's still down there. The most important answers may lie a few meters deep, intact, for 11 millennia. The scoreboard of facts. Confirmed, the age, about 11,600 years, dated by carbon and rechecked, the T-shaped pillars up to 16 tons with sophisticated animal carvings, construction by hunter-gatherers with no agriculture, sustained by hunting and feasts, the proximity to the genetic origin of cultivated wheat, and the intentional burial of the site. All solid data, and on its own it already rewrote the books. Still open, the exact religion, which gods, which beliefs, what the fox, the snake, the scorpion meant on the pillars, with no writing, it's reading in the dark. Whether religion really pulled agriculture or just walked beside it. And, of course, the haunting question, why they buried it all. Each of those answers might be sitting in one of the circles not yet opened. My verdict for this file, Göbekli Tepe is the most brutal reminder of how badly we underestimate the ancients. A people with no farming, no wheel, no writing and no metal stopped hunting long enough to raise stone cathedrals to their gods, and may have invented civilization itself as a side effect of that faith. The story we learned, bread before God, was backwards. And it was corrected by a hill that sat catalogued for 30 years as unimportant. Humanity's greatest archive was there all along. Someone just had to dig. It's worth sitting with just how alone this discovery stood at first. When the dates came back, many archaeologists simply didn't believe them. It was easier to assume a lab error than to accept that hunter-gatherers built monumental temples. It took years, and repeated datings, and then the discovery of sister sites nearby, before the field accepted that the timeline of civilization itself had to be redrawn. Sometimes the hardest thing in science isn't finding the evidence. It's believing it when it contradicts everything you were taught. And think about the skill in those carvings again, because it's easy to skim past. To render a fox in high relief on hard limestone, you need to plan the depth, control the chisel, understand the anatomy of the animal, and never make a fatal mistake. One wrong strike and the whole panel is ruined. This is the work of specialists, of artists, in a society we assumed had no room for specialists because everyone was supposedly busy just surviving. Göbekli Tepe says otherwise. Even before farming, humans made room for those whose job was to create the sacred. The astronomy angle is emerging too. Some researchers argue certain pillars and their animal carvings may map onto constellations, And that one famous panel, the vulture stone, could even record a comet impact or a specific date in the sky. That reading is debated, not proven. But if any part of it holds, it means these people were watching the heavens and encoding what they saw in stone, 11,000 years ago, millennia before the first astronomer we have a name for. And zoom out to what this does to our self-image. We tell ourselves civilization was a ladder, agriculture, then cities, then temples, then art, each step making the next possible. Göbekli Tepe kicks the ladder over. It says the temple came first, that the sacred may have pulled the practical into being, that the deepest human drive on that hill wasn't hunger but meaning. The first great thing our ancestors built together wasn't a granary or a wall. It was a place to stand before something larger than themselves. One last thread, and it's the most tantalizing. With radar showing dozens of buried circles still untouched, and Karahan Tepe and other sites emerging across the region, we are almost certainly looking at the opening pages of a story most of which is still underground. The people who dig there in the coming decades will read chapters we can't even guess at. The single most important archive of human origins isn't in a museum. It's still in the ground in Turkey, sealed, patient, waiting for the next spade. And you? Do you believe faith came before agriculture? And why do you think they buried the temple? Leave your verdict in the comments. This is one of the ones that sparks the best theories on the channel. Subscribe and hit the bell, a new mystery every day, and a full file every week. The archive never really closes.